Recording in progress.
In progress, yes. Hi, Ron. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Finally, after all these years. Yes.
Yes, yes. I can start with a fairly standard question, and we might do some slightly more off the wall stuff as we go along. But I suppose you're known for being a very prolific artist. Can you sort of let me know about a couple of the projects you're working on at the moment?
Ah, yes. I have, well, there was the band Sons of Apollo. I don't know if you're familiar, but it was a band with Mike Portnoy and Billy Sheehan, Jeff Scott Soto, Derek Sherinian on keys, and that has sort of split off into two bands. One of them is a similar type of prog rock, prog metal band called Whom Gods Destroy, named after a Star Trek episode. And I'm such a geek. So, yeah, it has Dino Jalusic on vocals and Bruno Valverde from the Brazilian band Angra on drums. He's incredible. Yas Namura, who's a phenomenal guitar player, but also a phenomenal bass player. He's on bass. And we are putting out March 15th, we're going to put out our debut album. And the other band is with the singer from Sons of Apollo, Jeff Scott Soto, who a lot of guitar players may know from the first few Ingve albums. He was the guy. And so we have a band with some old friends of mine, a band called Art of Anarchy that's been this on again, off again band. And he just during the pandemic, he's like, hey, if you do more music, I'll sing for you. I was like, cool. And there we go now, and is on again. And we put out an album last month, and I have had a solo album of just crazy instrumental guitar music that has been done since June that I'm just waiting until these bands are launched and in progress, and then I'm going to put that out and have a couple of nice guests on there. Not too many, just a few select favorites. One you mentioned before, I shan't say his name, but
Secret.
yeah, it'll be some interesting stuff. So I'm looking forward to getting that out. I do a lot of producing, which is really my biggest love. I hate to say it, but even more than guitar. Like if I had to choose between playing guitar or mixing an album, I just always loved the studio. It's been a weird background from the very beginning. I never really, like guitar was a tool used as part of a collaboration band to make songs happen. And for me, it was more about the end of it than the beginning of it. It wasn't about what I was doing. It was about just at the end, no matter who does what, in the end, together we have built this song. And for me, it was always about the studio and the writing and the creativity in that aspect of it. And that's what I always loved. Huge Beatles fan from the first time I heard them as a child. And when people ask, who's your favorite Beatle? I say George Martin, the producer. Yeah. And they did the impossible. They did things that couldn't happen in our just normal stream of space-time, reversing sound, even just simple multi-tracking, the things we take for granted as normal now, we are doing what is impossible in the actual world by capturing moments and layering moments. Yeah, that's what I love, is that doing the impossible and just creating sounds and things that we've never experienced before hearing them. And that's what I love about the studio and what I love about working with bands. And I love being a coach more than being on the field. I do. I help a lot of bands do their thing, and that's the part of it I love the most. So I produce from the beginning. I've always produced a lot. I was an adjunct professor at a state college in New York where I was teaching music production before Guns N' Roses and all the touring and everything and that stuff, besides putting out my own music. And even with my own music, I knew that it wasn't radio friendly, it wasn't made for the masses, and I pushed it on to where it belonged, which is music for TV shows, video games, horror movies, things like that. So 20 years ago, that's what I was doing is I had my own record label just for my own music, and I was pushing this new thing, internet distribution, since the late 90s, jumping on CD Baby when it was just Derek Sivers in his apartment in New York, running the company by himself, and all of that stuff. And that was it, just be realistic about your what matters to you and its place that you think it has in this world and go for it. Be genuine. Always be authentic. It's not up to you how the world is going to respond to what you do. The only thing that matters is that you are the most genuine version of you and that you give your best of whatever it is that you're doing. And the world decides from there. But that part is in your power, in your control. And that's the part that you really need to emphasize and put the most into. Don't worry about who's going to like it. You don't know who's going to like it. And whoever it is, whether it's 10 million people or 10 people, it's okay because you made a difference to those people and there's a butterfly effect to what comes out of that. So fear not. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the Beatles there, because I've got to say I've always loved them, and as I'm getting older and maybe hopefully wiser, I just seem to appreciate them more and more, and also that sort of perspective of like how old they were when they did things, and also the technology they had. I'll be playing through one of their older songs. I think, God, that middle eight's that's really sophisticated, and you kind of think, how did they come up with it? So much good stuff. And like you were saying about the technology with 4 tracks and 8 tracks, what they were able to do.
They did more in 7 years than people do in 40 years. And a lot of people don't realize they were the first ones to really do samples and loops. If you listen to the Revolver album, they took tape and they made little mini spools that they put together that would just loop around and repeat of pieces of music that they recorded. And like Tomorrow Never Knows, all those weird seagull sounding things and all of that stuff. Yeah, they
Incredible.
really took whatever technology was available and did the most they could with it. It's such a great example of creativity because they weren't relying on more advanced technology to make things happen. They were taking whatever they had, whether it was 2 rocks to bang together, if that's all they had, and they really used their creativity to get the most out of it, which is a good lesson for all of us. You don't need what you don't have. And you have a lot more than you realize if you just really look around and get creative with what you can possibly do with it. So, in fact, when I was teaching way back when at that college, this reminds me, one time as for the students, I'm having a brain fart, my brain isn't awake yet, a thing to do. I took a can and I threw it against the wall. I had everyone listen, say, listen to the sound it makes when it hits and falls and bounces. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, you have to turn that into a song. So one person would turn it into like bum, ba, bum, bum. Another one would just turn it into a drum beat and put things over it, and they all had to use that as inspiration to make music from, just a can hitting a wall and falling to the ground. And the idea of that is not about the can, it's about changing the way you think so that you start seeing everything as potential, inspiration. And that's how we should think. Don't wait for it to come to you. It's already there. It's waiting for you to recognize it. Yeah.
You're associated actually with playing fretless guitar quite a bit. And how did you get attracted to that instrument? How did that come about?
Well, I used to build my own guitars, or I could say destroy my own guitars. And I was horrible at it, but I love to experiment. So I would do very strange things. I had one double neck that I made out of an old Stratocaster where I took a bass neck, cut it at the 7th fret, so it was only that long, stopped there, pulled the frets off, and refretted it with the distance of the 12th fret of a guitar to the end, routed out the bottom horn of this Stratocaster, sunk this guitar in there and put on guitar tuners and just got the right distance to put just a regular bridge tailpiece on it and a DiMarzio Super Distortion, and had this mini octave guitar sticking out of the bottom horn, and just gave it a toggle switch for, that neck, other neck, and there was that. There was another guitar where I pulled off all the frets and filled it with coins, like $4.63, I think it added up to, which is what the guitar might be worth in its entirety after what I did to it. And just shaved down the sides and filled it with this epoxy goop that I made of just glue and shavings of everything. And so that was sort of like a fretless. So it was like I had a double neck and a fretless, but they were both firewood. They were not even a fire would repel them. They'd be like, I'm not gonna burn on that. Like, it's just crap. So yeah, and then I met Vigier Guitars, the French company Vigier, who actually know how to build guitars many years later. I mean, I was doing this stuff as a teenager, and I was just doing it because I love to experiment, and it was just another form of physical art in a way, just making these weird guitar things. Can't even call them guitars, guitar things. And it was 1997, and at that point, I had this 1983 Ibanez Roadstar that I had hacked up and turned into what looks like Swiss cheese. So it was my own Swiss cheese guitar, and that was my main guitar that I used for like 13 years on all my older albums and everything. That was the guitar, and I would tour with it. And I was doing a clinic tour in France in 1997, and Vigier rep came with a guitar to the clinic and said, try this guitar out. And I was like, I'm not looking for any endorsements. I build my own stuff. I'm happy with that. I don't want to just take gear. And he said, just try it. And after being pretty defiant about it, I finally said, okay. And I played the thing, and it was like playing on the most delicious Herrigold brick of butter you ever played on. And I was like, all right, maybe we should talk, because you guys know what you're doing and I don't, and I'm shooting myself in the foot over principle here. So let's talk. And I met up with Patrice, and we had dinner and just talked about everything, got to know each other, and he was such a wonderful guy. And from there, we started doing it together. And he made that crazy flying foot guitar, which looked like the character from my very first album, The Adventures of Bumblefoot, which is this weird instrumental album on Shrapnel Records, 1995 it came out. And it had this thing, a bumblefoot, which was, it looked like a human foot with black and yellow stripes and a stinger and wings, like a bee, like if you morphed a bee and a human foot. Very Monty Python-ish, I guess. So he made a guitar that looked like that body, it looked like that character, and when you push down the vibrato bar, the wings popped out of the sides. It was incredible. And it sounded fantastic. The tiny body, the way it was chambered, and just maybe by luck or just because they know what they're doing, it was a very just nice warm mids to the guitar and so comfortable to play, and it was fantastic. So there was that, and then we went to our first NAMM show together, and I saw all their fretless guitars hanging up, and my eyes got all big. I was like, why didn't you tell me you make fretless guitars? And I remember Patrice, I'll never forget it, he had this frustrated look, and he just looked up and sighed, and he's like, this company has been around since 1980. We have sold 4 of them. Nobody wants to play fretless guitar. And I was like, I do, give me one. And immediately I just started writing songs with them and putting them on albums and everything, and loved the thing. The only issue I had is I had to choose between playing a fretless guitar or a fretted guitar. And I'm more of an and person than an or person. So I felt like I needed both at once access. So I was thinking of all different ideas, from retractable frets to a neck that flips. One side is one, the other side is the other, a flipping middle. but it just seemed the most practical thing was a double neck, having a double neck guitar. And they started making the double neck, this thing. And what's interesting about their guitars is they don't use a truss rod. They have a sheet of graphite going through the necks, and they stay very stable. They have a 0 fret, which is good for consistency, going from open to first fret. They use 1 meg volume pots, push pretty nicely. And with normal passive low output pickups, you can get some good organic feel. And the guitars that I use, we stuck in little capacitor, resistor thingy stuff where when you roll down the volume, it brightens up. So the guitar, instead of getting dark, it stays bright. It even increases a little bit of brightness at the very bottom. So you could have a driven amp pull your guitar volume all the way back to 1, and it has this like nice shimmery clean sound to it. So it's really good. And they're fretless necks. The surface is metal. It's some kind of stainless steel alloy, and it gets a better sustain than wood. It's great. So yeah, I use that in everything, all my solo stuff, Art of Anarchy, Sons of Apollo, even when I fronted Asia in 2019 to do all the slide parts that Steve Howe did, I would use the fretless. And yeah, so that's my everything go-to guitar. Yeah, oh, and the thimble on there as well. So I should point that out. That's something I've been doing for a million years, where on the guitar, right here, this little hole right there, it is a magnetized hole. Inside it is a metal thimble. And what I do is the idea of, like I was saying before, 2 plus 5, 5 plus 2. Well, we are pressing a metal string against a metal fret. Once we are beyond the fretboard, then you just press something metal against the metal string. So this is like a mobile fret that I could get the rest of the notes going up the neck. And also you can use it from this direction to shorten the vibrating length of string, so that instead of a note that you fret down vibrating to the bridge, it gets stopped by this, and it de-intonates as if you were moving the bridge this way, which by doing that is taking the center of your guitar and moving it that way, which means that your frets are actually higher than they would be. So it's raising the pitch of all the frets. Let's say you have that. Once you put this down, so what I do is I play from both directions. Instead of going, I might go like that. And this one is slidable, so you can extend a bend by just adding like that. So that's what I do with that. Yeah.
Do you remember when you first had that revelation, that first moment when you thought, I think this will work?
It was a long time ago. It was back in the guitar building teenage days in the 80s. And I just loved experimenting. And it was really after hearing Eddie Van Halen. It was like hearing him was being like handed a permission slip to say, do whatever the fuck you can think of. It's not just blues riffs anymore. Now, anything you can do, any way you can screw with the string to make it speak, find your way, do it. And I started really screwing around with it and just fell into that. And originally I had a 9-volt battery on a rubber band on a string on a holder, and I would grab that and use the side of that, but it was too much to just have to grab it and stop everything. And it's more practical to just have a metal fingertip that you can tap with. So practicality.
It's interesting because I think you probably are one of the few guitarists who came up with, like you say, one of those anything goes ideas that Eddie didn't. I think a lot of people expanded maybe things that he found, but you found something else, which is really interesting.
With him, it would be maybe tapping the side of the pick to get just kind of high pitch blink blink. Like if you listen to the song Sinner's Swing, ba-da-dum, ba-da-bum, blink blink,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But I was looking to just extend the range of the guitar, and nobody invented a whammy pedal yet. So had I waited a little bit longer, I would have just bought one of those.
Brilliant. I love it. Oh, let's talk about the other end then. As we've talked about guitars a bit, so let's talk about how you get your sound, your amp, how you approach amplifiers and effects and things like that.
Very simple, the Helix pedal. And that's it. I don't even run it into an amp. I don't do anything fancy. It's at a point where I just run the sound direct into front of house, and that's it. And it's the best tone I've ever gotten because it's so easy to use that you can really dig deep into the parameters and find what you're looking for and get creative with it. You spend less time learning how to use it and more time actually using it. And that's why I went with the Helix. I've tried a lot of different pedals, different modelers, and for me, I found that that one was just the most user-friendly. And everybody's different. Everyone is gonna. Recently, I was comparing them to a litter of puppies. One puppy is an Axe Effects, one puppy is a Helix, one puppy is a Kemper, and whichever puppy just jumps out at you and is like, "That's the one, taking this baby home." It's kind of like that. They all can accomplish the same thing. The technology is there, and it's really up to your ears and the sound you're looking to get. Everything can get it. It's the one that you're most comfortable with. And for me, I just always find that line 6 is the most human intuitive, easiest to navigate. You just look at it and start to figure it out. And the sound has gotten better and better and better. I started with a Pod 2.0 way back when, and it served the purpose, but I mean, you can't compare it now to the technology. And the one thing with them that I had a problem with over the years that I feel like has mostly been solved is you could call it latency, but it's more like you were missing the initial few milliseconds of reaction time. When you pick a note, boom, it's done. And through past digital stuff, when you pick, it's almost like it was gating or not capturing the first few milliseconds of your punch. And as a player, you can feel it and hear it. It was enough where you felt like there was a latency. And I think they've figured that out. I think the processing speeds and power have gotten good enough where that is not an issue anymore. And the things you can do routing wise are things you cannot do in the analog world. It's mind blowing what you can do with an expression pedal. And with the Helix, it's not just making a preset, it's programming every parameter of every block, whichever ones you want, I believe up to 64 of them, where you can assign them to not just be different in a snapshot, but to be affected by the expression pedal. So in one setting, in one snapshot of a preset, you can have 16 different blocks of things where when you go from heel to toe in the expression pedal, you can have it go from the sound of one amp fading off to the sound of another amp. You can have a delay speed, maybe speed up so that the repeats build and it raises the pitch, bum, 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 kind of thing. You can have it go from full reverb far away to drive. You can have just certain parts of a 10-band EQ change. How the hell would you do that in the real world? You can't. So we have reached a point with the technology where we can get so creative with just the routing of the parameters of our effects and amps and cabinets and everything that yeah. So as from the production standpoint, I just love that. Yeah, and as a guitar player, you can make the weirdest sounds that you wouldn't be able to make it in 10 years ago. You wouldn't be able to do it.
It's almost going back to the point you made originally about the Beatles, how changing reality, that's what we're doing. And so I could see why that sort of technology would really appeal to you, because you're kind of like, well, what can I do with this? What can I make that hasn't existed before?
You want to create illusions, people are like, how the hell are you doing that? Like, there's a song that I made during the pandemic called Planetary Lockdown. Fitting name. Just came running home from a ill-fated tour, and the pandemic hit. A week later, whole world is locked down, and I had the song sitting that I never had time to finish, so I named it Planetary Lockdown. And half of the song, I'm using the Helix with a pitch delay where every note I hit has a 16th note, a fifth higher. So you hit an E, and a 16th note later, it hits a B. And I came up with all these patterns and things where I might hit a pair of 30-second notes quickly. So instead of just going boom, boom, yeah, and things where if you play right on that 16th note, the same note, then you're getting a group of three going, a fifth and a fifth of that, and you don't even notice, it goes by so quickly that you're playing right on top of the delayed fifth, the same note, and just came up with all these different playing patterns, and it created the sound that I just wouldn't be able to do if I just tried to use my hands to do it. So really using technology to create sounds that you just can't do any other way. Yeah.
I suppose the other thing also is just to do, I suppose, with cost and size, because like say to even attempt some of the ideas you're talking about, you would have to have racks and racks of equipment, things plugged into each other, all kinds of stuff that would weigh a ton.
Literal truckloads of gear following you around at the cost of millions of dollars, or having all that same gear virtually in a backpack, in your suitcase as a carry-on. And if your gear breaks, it is completely replaceable, and you just load the plugins, the presets back in, and you're good to go. So you can't compare. And you could say, well, these things are modelers, they're simulators, they're trying to imitate the real thing, so nothing beats the sound of the real thing. It's getting pretty damn close, to the point that if you're at a venue and someone has an amp and a mic on it going through the PA, and you're listening from 50 rows of seats away to it, you may not really be able to tell. And even on an album, you might have that, but depending on how it's mixed and how it was recorded and captured, you may not be able to tell, because there's a lot of other steps. If you're just standing in a room facing it, you might be able to tell. But even then, it depends on how you create that preset. One trick I like to do that I would love you all to experiment with is, it's pretty fancy. Start off, you have what I call your stomp boxes, compression, pitch shifting, if there's a distortion, things like that. Have those. And then I use I guess you can call it a splitter, that turns it into 2 rows. And one has my main amp, which is like an Engel clone, going into a cabinet, and the other one is going into a line 6, I forget what it is, into another cabinet, and I just bring it in a little bit just to round out some of the mids and smooth the sound out a bit from what I'm hearing in the Engel, and then they sum back together. And then I take an external IR that sounds like another cabinet, and at 50% I use that, and it kind of kills the highs, but it smooths out the sound so much that it really sounds a lot more like you're in the room with an amp, and it's sound waves in the air hitting your ear, you lose the digital grit by doing that. And then I'll have the post effects of delay, reverb, things like that. And in the end, if it's too much like this because of that IR, it depends on the IR you use as the external one. I might have a final EQ where I just take 12K and just pin it bright just to take all the missing stuff that you may not hear so much, but it's there. And it gives you the sense of just the full top end being alive or being blanketed. And yeah, something to experiment with. But that's what I do. That's my own little trick where I've played everything from Hellfest to just a bar, using the guitar straight into the Helix, straight into front of house. And people would say, "Oh, I loved your tone. What amps were you using?" It's like, none. And they couldn't tell. And there were times where I played in Sons of Apollo, where all my Engel half stacks were being used by the keyboard player, running his gear through it, and I was going direct to front of house, and everyone would say, "Oh God, I love the sound of those Engels. You sounded so, what a great tone you had." And it's like, it wasn't the Engels. It was just a Helix.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions today, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's great to chat and catch up. Yeah.